My name is Harper Quinn. I am 30 years old. My family betrayed me by choosing to bury our darkest secrets instead of facing them, shattering the trust I'd clung to for years. It happened at our annual reunion dinner in Nashville, where the air hung heavy with unspoken accusations, and my mother led the charge, her voice slicing through the chatter as she demanded I hand over the old files I'd found in Grandmother Rose's attic, insisting they stay hidden to protect everyone, especially my father-in-law George, whose name appeared tangled in those twisted records of past harms. My brother Alex sat there, eyes downcast, nodding along without a word of protest, his silence hitting harder than any argument could. The pain twisted inside me like a knot I couldn't untie, knowing these pages detailed abuses tied to our family's history, yet they expected me to just let it go. In that moment, I gripped the folder tighter, my mind racing to the one ally I could still count on, and whispered my first firm refusal, a quiet stand that hinted at the storm I was about to unleash. As the words left my mouth, the table fell into an uneasy hush, everyone shifting in their seats like they'd been caught in a lie they couldn't quite deny. My mother leaned forward, her expression hardening into that familiar mix of disappointment and control, the one she'd worn since I was a kid, questioning why certain topics were off limits in our house. "Harper, you're being selfish," she said, her tone laced with that guilt-tripping edge she mastered long ago. "Think about what this could do to us all, your father-in-law's reputation, the business deals, even Alex's fresh start after everything he's been through." Alex glanced up, then his face pale, but he didn't contradict her, just muttered something about not wanting to drag up old pains that could ruin lives. It stung seeing my own brother side with the silence, especially when I'd confided in him weeks earlier about the disturbing notes I'd uncovered, hints of coerced introductions, and exploited vulnerabilities from decades back, all linked to Grandmother Rose and her so-called elite social circles. I pushed back from the table, my chair scraping against the wooden floor of our rented venue hall overlooking the Cumberland River, the city lights twinkling outside like distant warnings. Part of me wanted to flip the folder open right there, read aloud the entries mentioning George and how he'd allegedly benefited from those shadowy connections, but I held off, sensing the room's tension coiling tighter. Instead, I met my mother's gaze and said, "Selfish or just done pretending we're the perfect Quinns when we've ignored survivors like Alex for too long?" That jab landed, her lips thinning, but before she could fire back, my father cleared his throat from the head of the table, trying to play peacemaker as always. "Let's not escalate this tonight," he urged, though his eyes flicked nervously to George, who sat smugly sipping his whiskey untouched by the fray. The confrontation simmered as dessert plates were cleared, but I could feel the undercurrent pulling us towards something irreversible. My mother circled back later, pulling me aside near the coat rack, her whisper sharp and insistent. "You think digging this up helps anyone? It'll destroy George's standing in the community, and where does that leave your marriage? Your stability?" She paused, adding with a sarcastic twist, "Or is that the point, proving you're the moral hero, while the rest of us pay the price?" Her words cut deep, implying I was the outsider stirring trouble, not the one finally demanding accountability. I felt a surge of anger mixed with that old obligation to keep the peace, but as she waited for my surrender, I realized this wasn't just about old files. It was about years of her steering the family narrative, gaslighting me into believing my instincts were the problem. Hey everyone, if you've ever felt that pull between family loyalty and doing what's right, even when it risks everything, drop a comment below. Would you speak up or let the secret stay buried? Your stories keep me going through mine. Stepping outside for air, the cool Nashville evening hit me carrying faint music from downtown bars, a reminder that life pulsed on beyond our family's stifled truths. Back inside, the group had splintered into smaller conversations, but I caught snippets my cousin Nora Simmons, always the level-headed one, pulling Alex aside, her voice low but urgent. "You know Harper's right about this," she said, glancing my way with a supportive nod. Nora had been my ally since we were teens, the one who listened without judgment when I first mentioned the attic discovery during a late-night call. She'd even suggested I consult someone outside the family, which is how I'd connected with our neighbor Lisa, who turned out to have her own tangled history with Grandmother Rose's old associates. Lisa wasn't at the reunion, but her warnings echoed in my head. "Those files mention more than you think. Be careful who you trust." As the night wore on, my mother rallied the collective family, what we jokingly called the Quinn Circle, to her side. My uncle from out of town chimed in, echoing her concerns about reputations and legacies, while George finally spoke up, his tone dripping with condescension. "Young lady, some things are best left in the past." He drawled as if I were a child meddling in adult affairs. "Your grandmother built this family. Don't tear it down over rumors." Rumors. The files weren't vague, they detailed specific instances, like introductions facilitated by associates that led to harms, with George's name popping up in social logs from those elite gatherings. I bit back a retort, but the pressure built, each comment layering on the guilt-like weights I couldn't shake off. By midnight, as guests trickled out, my mother cornered me again, this time with my father in tow. "Hand them over, Harper," she demanded, her hand outstretched, eyes flashing with that mix of authority and desperation. "We're not discussing this anymore. It's for the greater good." My father added softly, "Pleas for peace." But peace at what cost? I clutched the folder, my heart pounding, knowing if I complied it'd mean erasing the voices of those affected, like Alex, who'd hinted at his own unresolved traumas from childhood brushes with that world. Nora caught my eye from across the room, mouthing, "Stand firm," a small spark in the growing darkness. The standoff stretched my mother's impatience, turning to sarcasm. "What, you think you're some investigator now? Going to expose us all and play the victim?" That jab twisted the knife, implying my motives were selfish rather than just. I felt the room's eyes on me, the collective waiting for my fold, but instead a quiet resolve settled in. I wouldn't back down tonight, not with the truth burning in my hands. Yet, as I turned to leave, George's quiet chuckle hinted at complications ahead, a mini threat that made me wonder what countermeasures they had planned. Driving home through Nashville's quiet streets, the reunion's fallout replayed in my mind, each accusation amplifying the emotional coercion I'd endured for years. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "We need to talk. Alone. Don't make this harder." It was classic, her private pressure to bend me without witnesses. I ignored it instead, calling Nora, who agreed to meet for coffee. "I've got your back," she said over the line, her voice steady. "But be ready. They'll push harder now." Her words hung like a cliffhanger, foreshadowing the escalation I sensed coming, as if the family's unity depended on my silence. At the cafe downtown, Nora slid into the booth, her expression serious. "I looked into those names you mentioned from the files," she whispered, glancing around. "Lisa's right. Grandmother Rose wasn't alone. There were enablers, and George's involvement goes deeper than social ties." She paused, adding a twist. "I found an old letter in my mom's things linking him to financial gains from those circles." The revelation hit like a punch, confirming my suspicions, but raising the stakes. What if exposing this cost me my marriage, my place in the family? Nora's support felt like a lifeline, but as my phone vibrated again with another insistent message from my mother, I knew the coercion was just ramping up. Back at my apartment, I spread the files across the table, piecing together the timeline Grandmother Rose's network in the 80s and 90s, facilitating connections that exploited vulnerable people, with George benefiting through business deals masked as investments. Alex had been peripherally affected as a teen, witnessing things he never fully shared, which explained his silence at dinner. My mother's role, the protector, always prioritizing image over truth, gaslighting us into believing it was all exaggerated stories. A knock at the door startled me. It was Lisa, our longtime neighbor who'd once worked as a secretary in those elite environments. "I heard about the reunion," she said, stepping in with a wary look. "Your family won't let this go quietly." Lisa's visit added layers, her stories corroborating the files with personal anecdotes, how she'd seen young folks introduced under false pretenses, the harms swept under rugs. "Your grandmother boasted about it once," she confided, her voice trembling. "And George, he knew profited even." The details escalated my dread, but also my determination. As she left, promising discretion, my mother's call came through. "Meet me at the house tomorrow," she said, her tone a blend of plea and command. "Or we'll handle this our way." The veiled threat lingered, a suspenseful hook, pulling me toward the inevitable clash. That night, sleep evaded me, the psychological pressure mounting like a slow vice. My husband, tied to George through family business, had been distant since the reunion, hinting at divided loyalties. "Just drop it," he'd texted earlier, echoing the family's line. It felt like emotional entrapment, forcing me to choose between truth and ties. But as dawn broke, I made a small, sharp move, photocopying key pages for safekeeping, a jab at their attempts to control the narrative. Little did they know this was only the beginning of the unraveling. The following afternoon, I arrived at the family home on the outskirts of Nashville, the sprawling ranch-style house that once felt like sanctuary, now looming like a trap. My mother greeted me at the door, her smile forced, leading me to the living room where my father and George waited. "Let's resolve this rationally," she started, but her eyes betrayed the coercion ahead. George leaned back in his armchair, smirking. "Those papers are family property, hand them over, and we forget this nonsense." His words dripped with sarcasm, implying I was overreacting to harmless history. I sat folder in lap and countered, "Harmless. The survivors mentioned the coerced situations, that's not nothing." My mother waved it off. "Exaggerations from bitter people. Think about Alex. Dragging this out hurts him most." The guilt trip landed, but I pushed back. "Or protects the enablers like George here." He chuckled darkly. "Careful, girl. Accusations have consequences." The tension thickened, each exchange building toward a breaking point, leaving me wondering if I'd walk out with my resolve intact or cracked under their united front. The tension in the living room thickened like fog rolling in off the river, my mother's demand hanging between us, as George watched with that predatory gleam, waiting for me to crack. I took a steadying breath, refusing to let their united front rattle me further, and set the folder on the coffee table, not handing it over but placing it there as a challenge. "This isn't about forgetting," I said, my voice calmer than I felt, laced with a bit of sarcasm to match her earlier jab. "It's about finally acknowledging the harms Grandmother Rose's network caused, and how some people like George walked away unscathed while others suffered." George's smirk faded, replaced by a sharp glare. "Watch your tone, Harper. You're treading on thin ice, accusing family of God knows what." My mother jumped in, her words cutting like a well-honed knife. "Exactly. You're not some crusader. You're our daughter, supposed to put family first. Hand it over before you regret it." My father shifted uncomfortably, murmuring, "Janet, maybe we should hear her out." But she shot him a look that silenced him instantly, revealing the authority she wielded in these moments. I didn't budge, instead flipping open the folder to a marked page, reading aloud a snippet about coerced introductions at elite gatherings. Names redacted, but implications clear. This describes survivors being brought into circles where they were exploited, and George's name appears in the guest logs multiple times. The room erupted, then George slamming his fist on the armrest, bellowing, "Lies those are forged or misinterpreted. Your grandmother was a socialite, not a criminal." My mother snatched the page, her face flushing. "See, you're twisting history to play the hero. Give me the rest, or we'll make sure you face consequences, maybe even cut you out of the will like we discussed." The threat landed hard, a psychological jab aimed at my financial stability, knowing my job as a customer success rep at a local tech firm didn't pay enough to weather a family fallout. As the argument heated, my phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from Nora. "On my way. Hold strong." It was a small relief, but the pressure mounted when my brother Alex unexpectedly walked in from the kitchen where he'd been lurking. "Harper, Mom's right," he said, his voice wavering but aligned with them. "Digging this up reopens wounds for me too, things I saw as a kid that I just want buried." His admission twisted the knife. I'd always thought Alex might side with truth given his hints at past traumas, but here he was enabling the silence. "So you'd rather protect enablers than survivors?" I shot back the words, sharp, exposing the hypocrisy. He flinched, but my mother interjected with sarcasm. "Oh, now! You're the expert on trauma, spare us the lecture, and do what's best for everyone." The confrontation dragged on, voices rising until neighbors might hear, but I held my ground, pocketing the key pages I'd photocopied earlier. Finally, I stood. "I'm leaving with these. If you want them, earn it by facing what's in them." My mother's eyes narrowed, a veiled promise of retaliation. "You think this ends here? We'll see about that." As I drove away, her words echoed a mini cliffhanger, leaving me paranoid about what, handling it their way, meant legal threats, family ostracism, or something darker tied to George's influence. The next few days blurred into a haze of escalating coercion, starting with ignored calls, turning into voicemails laced with guilt. "Harper, think about your father. He's stressed enough without this drama." My mother left one, her tone a masterclass in emotional manipulation. I focused on work, but even there the strain showed. I snapped at a client during a virtual meeting, nearly losing an account. Nora met me for lunch midweek at a bustling spot near Broadway, her presence a steady anchor. "I've been digging more," she confided over salads, sliding a printout across the table. "Found online archives linking Grandmother Rose to shady charity events where these introductions happened. George's company sponsored a few coincidence. Her revelation amped the suspense, hinting at financial trails we could follow, but it also raised stakes. If exposed, it could tank his real estate firm." That afternoon, Lisa dropped by my apartment unannounced, bringing coffee and concern. "Your family's circling wagons," she warned, settling on the couch. "I overheard your uncle talking at the community center. They're planning to discredit you, say you're unstable from stress." It was a low blow, using my past burnout against me, but Lisa's insight fueled my resolve. We pored over the files together, her adding details from her secretary days. I typed invites for those gatherings, saw young folks come and go looking shell-shocked. As we connected dots, my phone rang. My husband, his voice strained. "George called. Says if you don't drop this, it affects us both, maybe even my job." The ultimatum hung a high-stakes twist, forcing me to question loyalties, wondering if my marriage was collateral in this family war. By evening, the pressure peaked with an unexpected visit from my cousin Brian, a new face in the fray whom I'd barely seen since childhood reunions. Brian Lanky and Ernest showed up at my door with a neutral expression claiming he was just checking in. But it quickly turned coercive. Aunt Janet sent me, he admitted after an awkward hug. She says hand over the files, or she'll freeze your access to the family trust, something about protecting assets from reckless actions. His words were a jab implying I was the reckless one, not the enablers. And George, he's furious, talking lawsuits for defamation. I eyed him warily. Brian had always been the go-between, but this felt like manipulation, escalating the isolation as family turned against me one by one. I sent Brian away empty-handed, but his visit left me rattled, the moral entrapment tightening sacrifice truth for stability or risk. Everything Nora texted later. Meet tomorrow, I have a contact who can help verify these. It was a glimmer, but as I lay awake hearing phantom knocks, I sensed the family's next move looming unpredictable and potentially devastating. The meeting with Nora's contact happened at a quiet park bench overlooking Percy Priest Lake, the water's calm belying my inner turmoil. Her contact was Elena Vargas, a freelance investigator I'd never met, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense with a notebook full of scribbles. Nora filled me in, Elena said, skipping pleasantries. These files, they match patterns I've seen in old trafficking probes, elite networks hiding behind social facades. She reviewed my photocopies, pointing out consistencies with public records. George's name ties to donations that funded events where abuses occurred. Not direct involvement, but proximity raises flags. The info was a bombshell, flipping my understanding this wasn't just family secrets, but potentially broader scandals. As we talked, my mother called. I let it voicemail, but listened later. Harper, stop involving outsiders. This stays in the family or you'll force our hand. The threat escalated, hinting at social isolation, perhaps spreading rumors to my work circle. Elena advised caution. Document everything. They might try to intimidate. Her warning built suspense, leaving me paranoid about tales or hacked emails. Back home, I confided in Lisa over tea, who added her own twist. I remember Elena from old circles, she's legit, but watch your back. George has got connections that could bury this. The psychological pressure intensified that week, with Alex texting pleas to let it go for Dad's health, guilting me into self-doubt. My husband grew distant, sleeping on the couch, muttering about unnecessary drama. It felt like identity suppression erasing my voice in favor of the family's narrative. But a turning point came when Brian called unexpectedly. His tone shifted. Harper, I read some of what you sent me copies of. It's bad. Mom's wrong to cover it. His defection was a twist, providing insider support, but risky. If discovered, it'd paint him as a traitor too. Armed with Elena's insights, I confronted my mother again, this time at a neutral coffee shop downtown. She arrived alone, but her posture screamed control. Ready to end this foolishness? She asked, sarcasm dripping. Or do you enjoy tearing us apart? I laid out the evidence, including Elena's findings. This isn't about me. It's about accountability for survivors, like those affected by Rose's actions. She scoffed. Survivors dramatic. Much George did nothing wrong. You're chasing ghosts. The exchange turned vicious, her jabs personal, always the difficult one, never fitting in. It hurt, but I fired back. Better difficult than complicit. As I left, her parting shot lingered. You'll regret this when you're alone. The words teased a devastating isolation ahead, leaving the conflict teetering on the edge of irreversible fallout. Over the next days, the family's retaliation ramped up my access to shared accounts, frozen whispers reaching my boss about family issues affecting performance. Nora and Elena met with me, secretly plotting next steps, perhaps going public anonymously, but a shocking call from Lisa upended everything. Someone broke into my place, took my notes on the files. The sabotage hinted at desperation escalating the stakes, to physical threats making me question if truth was worth the danger. The break-in at Lisa's place shook me more than I let on, turning what started as family secrets into something that felt dangerously real, with the sabotage suggesting my mother and George were willing to cross lines I'd never imagined. I spent that night double-checking locks and scanning the files again, my mind racing through worst-case scenarios, but by morning, I decided to push forward, calling Elena to loop her in her calm assurance, steadying me as we planned our next move. We met at her office in a nondescript building near Music Row, the hum of guitars from nearby studios, a ironic backdrop to our grim discussion. Elena spread out printouts, her finger-tracing connections. This isn't just history. There's a pattern of cover-ups, and your family's reaction screams they're hiding more. She introduced me to her associate Marcus Hale, a burly ex-cop turned private eye who'd worked similar cases, another layer of support. I hadn't expected his gruff demeanor hiding a sharp mind. "I've seen this before," Marcus said, leaning in with a wry smile. Powerful folks like George think they're untouchable, but paper trails don't lie. Together we mapped out a strategy, anonymous tips to a local journalist backed by verified excerpts to force transparency without fully exposing me yet. As we wrapped up, my phone lit up with a call from Brian, his voice hushed like he was sneaking the conversation. "Harper, I overheard Mom and George last night. They're planning to spin this as you being unstable, maybe even get a restraining order to seize the files." The betrayal deepened, a cutting reminder of how far emotional coercion could go, twisting family bonds into weapons. "Thanks for the heads up," I replied, my tone laced with sarcasm. "Nice to know loyalty runs deep, except when it doesn't." He paused, then added a twist. "I'm with you on this. I'll feed you what I can, but if they find out..." His unfinished warning hung, escalating the suspense, making every family interaction feel like a potential trap. Work that afternoon dragged, my focus shattered as I fielded a concerned email from my boss about personal distractions, no doubt whispers from George's network reaching my tech firm. I confided briefly in a colleague, Jenna Brooks, who'd become a casual friend over lunch breaks. She wasn't deeply involved, but her empathetic ear provided a momentary breather. "Sounds toxic," Jenna said, her words a jab at the absurdity. Family shouldn't be a battlefield. Her support, though peripheral, reminded me I wasn't entirely isolated, but as I left the office, a text from my husband arrived. "We need to talk tonight. This is affecting us." The message teased a confrontation I dreaded, hinting at the irreversible losses piling up. Home felt less like a sanctuary, the apartment's quiet amplifying my anxiety, until my husband walked in, his face etched with frustration. "Harper, George is threatening to pull strings at my firm if you don't back off," he said, dropping his bag with a thud. "Is this worth blowing up our life?" The question stung, a psychological jab, forcing me to defend my stance. "It's about righting wrongs, not just us survivors. Like Alex deserve better than silence." He shook his head, sarcasm creeping in. "And what about us? You're choosing ghosts over our future." The argument spiraled, his words echoing my mother's guilt trips, until he stormed out for a walk, leaving me alone with the files, questioning if partial truth could salvage anything. The next morning brought a sharper escalation, a certified letter from a lawyer courtesy of George, demanding the return of family property or face legal action for theft and defamation. My mother's signature on the document was the ultimate cut, proving she'd spearheaded this private coercion to bury the past. I forwarded it to Elena, who conferenced in Marcus. "This is bluff mostly," Marcus assured, "but it ups the ante time to counter." We decided on a measured response, leaking select redacted pages to a trusted online forum for survivors, anonymous but traceable enough to spark questions without full exposure. Nora joined us virtually, her input crucial as she revealed another layer. I found emails in Grandmother Rose's old account, George, pressuring her to keep quiet about certain associates years ago. The evidence mounted, but so did the fallout. Alex called, his voice breaking. Harper Mom's saying you're destroying the family. Please stop. His plea twisted the moral entrapment tighter, forcing an impossible choice between him and justice. I love you, Alex, but covering this hurts you more in the long run. I replied, the words heavy with regret. He hung up the silence, a cliffhanger foretelling deeper rifts. As the leak went live that evening, I watched from my laptop, heart pounding. The forum buzzed with responses, survivors sharing similar stories, validating the file's gravity. But victory felt hollow when my mother ambushed me with a late-night visit, pounding on the door until I let her in. "What have you done?" She hissed, her face a mask of fury and fear. "George is livid. This could ruin him." Her sarcasm peaked. "Congratulations, hero. Now watch as we all pay for your righteousness." I stood firm, countering with a jab of my own. "Better pay now than let harms fester like you always have." The exchange ended with her storming out, vowing to cut ties, a promise that lingered like a threat. The days blurred into a whirlwind of consequences. The leak gained traction, prompting a local news outlet to investigate, putting pressure on George without directly naming him yet. Elena and Marcus helped navigate the fallout, their expertise a shield, but the wins came at costs. My husband filed for separation, citing irreconcilable differences over the obsession, a loss that gutted me. Alex distanced himself, siding with the family's narrative of my betrayal, deepening the isolation. Even Jenna at work pulled back, wary of the drama spilling over. In quieter moments, I reflected with Lisa over coffee, her stories of past resilience inspiring me forward. "You did what few would," she said, a quiet affirmation amid the wreckage. Brian snuck updates confirming George's deals crumbling under scrutiny, a partial justice. But the family fractures felt permanent no more. Reunions, no shared holidays, just echoes of what was. Months later, as the investigations simmered without full explosions, George facing audits, not charges, I sat alone in my smaller apartment, the original files donated anonymously to an advocacy group. The truth had surfaced enough to help some survivors find closure, including hints that aided Alex in his own quiet healing, though he never acknowledged it. Yet the victory tasted bittersweet, laced with losses, a broken marriage, estranged kin, and a lingering ache for the family that once was. I chose myself, boundaries firm, but the price was solitude, a necessary scar from standing against the tide. Thank you for listening to my story. It's been cathartic sharing this, even if the ending isn't tidy. If you've faced similar family secrets tearing things apart, what would you sacrifice for truth? Share in the comments. Your experiences remind us we're not alone.